in Ukraine now in its sixth day. Russia apparently frustrated with a lack of progress early on, now ramping up attacks on civilians as we say hello and good morning. Brutal day today. We're live in Washington, D.C., and I'm Bill Hemmer. Hello, Dana.
It's good to be with you. I'm Dana Perino. This is America's Newsroom. We have so much to get to. There's been many developments overnight, including this. Russian missiles targeting a government office building overnight, just steps away from what is known as Freedom Square. It is the cultural heart of Ukraine's second largest city of Kharkiv.
Just brutal images. Sources telling Fox News this was an assassination attempt. The attacks also destroying an opera house and a concert hall. And take a look at this.
Indiscriminate shelling, blanketing neighborhoods. The Russian bombs leveling homes and apartments across the country. This as Ukraine accuses Moscow of detonating a so-called vacuum bomb. That is an illegal weapon that sucks oxygen from the air and vaporizes its victims.
Another troubling escalation. Satellite images here showing a Russian military convoy stretching for 40 miles in length. It's heading north to south toward Kyiv, raising concerns of an all-out assault on the Ukrainian capital.
Earlier this morning, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky gave an emotional video address to European Parliament, his interpreter speaking through tears. Zelensky reiterated his desire for Ukraine to join the EU. He said, "Prove you are with us, and life will win over death." And here's how that body responded. That ovation lasted for 1 minute and 10 seconds. We have Team Fox coverage. General Jack Keane is standing by with analysis. But first, let's go to Trey Yingst. He's reporting live from Kyiv. Trey?
Bill, Dana, good morning. You saw that video there, a massive explosion at a central square in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city. Dozens of victims, according to emergency services. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky giving some details about what took place. He says 2 Russian cruise missiles slammed into this symbolic square in the second largest Ukrainian city. Take a listen to what the emergency services minister in this area had to say about the scene and what it looked like.
People are under the ruins. We've pulled out bodies of at least 6 people and around 20 people are injured. 8 special equipment are working at the site and 80 rescuers of emergency situations. Together with volunteers, they are cleaning the ruins and bringing out the injured and the bodies.
President Zelensky describing this as undisguised terror and a war crime. It comes as the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv today is bracing for possible attacks on this city. The Russian Defense Ministry releasing some information today indicating they plan to hit security service buildings in this city. There are checkpoints all across the city. We were out today. Every block has things in the road, everything from dump trucks to pianos to potted plants, anything the Ukrainians can do to stop this Russian offensive. We saw those satellite images yesterday, a convoy more than 40 miles long of Russian troops, artillery units, tanks, and a variety of other weapons headed to this capital city. People today are still fleeing. We are at the train station watching as husbands said goodbye to their wives and their kids, many of them going west as the men here in the capital prepare to fight. Bill, Dana?
Trey, one question for you. We've been watching these images as the escalation has really ramped up. And are people there that are either sheltering in place or trying to flee aware of the kinds of weapons that Vladimir Putin is unleashing on parts of the country?
They are. They've seen the images online. The technology that exists today during this war, quite different from wars decades ago. And so people can see the carnage firsthand. And you see it in the streets, people on their smartphones looking down. You see videos and the sirens ringing in the distance. It's quite an apocalyptic scene. But the children, I think, most affected by this because they don't quite know what's going on. We saw it today as they were rushed to the train station. This little girl, 2-year-old Maria, that we saw with her mother as she was walking into the station. In the distance, air raid sirens were sounding. Just a horrific scene for the children of Ukraine as parents try to get them out of danger. And the Russians say they will target this city today. Bill, Dana?
Trey Yingst, thank you. I'm sure we'll see you again before the 2 hours are up. Thank you. Bill?
Dana, I want to go through a number of maps here, and General Jack Keane's with us in studio in Washington, too. So just give me a moment here to go through as much information as we can. based on where we are this morning. I really think the center of all this is Kyiv. We'll watch that. Kyiv. And these are just devastating images that we've seen so far. Remember, this is the second largest town in this country. 1.5 million people. It's the size of San Diego, California, or Phoenix, Arizona. Think about all those people there that are still either inside the city or watching those munitions fall from overhead. This is Kyiv, okay? Capital city is here. Remember, from the Belarus border, it's roughly 80 or 90 miles from the capital city up here to the Belarus border. Now, if this convoy is 40 miles long, well, heck, that covers half the route from the border to the north down to the capital city. It's just an extraordinary amount of military hardware that's now been set up and established on behalf of the Russian army. And here you see this convoy, as far as the eye can see, as it wraps its way around this circular intersection. I think there's one more image here we can show you as well. We've seen these pictures now for the last 2 days. Sometimes we see them and they're stacked 3 and 4 deep, and on and on and on they go. And these are supply trucks and APCs, armored personnel carriers. They are tanks in some cases as well, and they are moving on the capital city of Kyiv. This is Kharkiv. Some devastating images that we woke up to earlier today. If you see a lot of the video that we've been showing thus far, this is the downtown center. This is what's known as Freedom Square. That's the building you see that was targeted with the big explosion lighting up the daytime, afternoon sky. So this has been really a target for Putin and his army thus far today in Kharkiv. This is down in the south, Mariupol. I want to talk about this, but before we go further, let's bring in the general to give us an assessment about what Putin is up to at the moment. General, how do you see it?
Well, what's happening here, certainly, there's 4 axes that the Russian forces are moving on. And what's significant certainly is Kharkiv today. They're laying siege to it. And as we thought, they are bringing in their area attack weapons. In other words, something that is not precision guided. And those weapons are being used literally to topple the buildings and to destroy as many of the civilians as they possibly can. This is tube and rocket artillery, and it's also thermobaric weapons that are being introduced as well, and they're quite devastating. So we're at a stage here where Putin and his generals, they knew they were slowed down, they knew they miscalculated, they knew they had planning and execution problems. Now they're going all out to take these 2 major population centers, and Kyiv is the main effort. They have taken an operational pause for 2 days to do what? To bring reinforcements forward. This is tens of thousands of combat troops, in addition to resupplies for the entire force. And that is what is moving down that 40-mile stretch. And now, the good news is the Ukrainians have slowed this down. And they're using anti-tank weapons to ambush those vehicles. They've got some drones from the Turks that they're using as well. They're using mines, and they're giving it everything they can. And that's why the progress has been so slow. But eventually, what we're going to see is likely an encirclement of Kyiv. A massive introduction of, again, area attack weapons, tube and rocket artillery to rubble as much as they possibly can, and then move the combat operational forces in to take control of the city. Likely hundreds, if not thousands, will be caught up in the horror of what I'm really describing here, and the foreplay for that is what has taken place in Kharkiv today. The Ukrainian military is fighting valiantly, and they're certainly determined, and they have resolve, but they're up against an overwhelming force here. And the outcome is likely predictable. Hopefully we can get as much into them as we possibly can in terms of anti-tank weapons, Stinger missiles to shoot down aircraft, and also the drones that have been so effective. Likely the United States also has significant capability here. If we wanted to do something covertly to help them, I'm not talking about a fly zone, but something covertly. We got huge resources to do that. The president would have to issue a finding to do that, but we have means to do things like that at night. I can't get into the details of it. The CIA has capability, and so does the Department of Defense. That would take a special finding to do something like that because it was being done covertly.
We'll have Jen Psaki on later in the program. She did say yesterday, we won't waste the time to play this, but basically she said that no
40 million people who were opposed to him. And it was the people that ran out his last stooge in 2014. That was Yanukovych, who was Putin's stooge. Now the people are here with unbelievably more resolve, and he has taken on a nightmare scenario for years to come, and the consequences are pretty serious for him.
Thank you, General. We really rely on your expertise, and thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, great talking to you. And great to see you here, by the way.
Thanks.
Thank you. It's good to be here. The New York Post cover today is Mad Vlad, which I think a lot of people could agree that is what's happening. We also heard from President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, today. Let's listen to him here.
Ukraine is going to be lonesome. We have proven our strength. Do prove that you indeed are Europeans, and then life will win over death, and light will win over darkness.
That was a speech to the European Union with that emergency meeting in Brussels, and it was clear from his message that he needed help.
And a little bit, the frustration that he must feel in some ways. He, of course, was a comedian in his previous life before he became this leader, and now he has rallied many of the people in the West to unify behind him. And when he's speaking to the EU, I believe in his heart he's saying, you should have helped us before, because now we're in this situation, and now you also are at risk. And
what we saw over the past 4 days was a significant pledge of more weapons for the Ukrainian army. The question then becomes,
but when?
How do you get it there?
Yeah.
You got a convoy 20 miles long, 40 miles long in different parts of the country.
And the ports now being stripped off.
Correct. It will be tough. The specter of nuclear war casting a long shadow over tonight's State of the Union address. Can President Biden ease Americans' concerns on that issue and so many others? Dave.
And a surprising update on a group of Ukrainian war heroes initially believed to have been killed in a now legendary show of defiance. Were believed to be dead after they heroically refused to surrender their post on Snake Island. The Ukraine Navy now says Russian invaders captured them alive. Russian media reports they will be returned to Ukraine pending legal procedures. So we will keep an eye on that, but it's good to know they are alive.
Mr. President, should Americans be worried about nuclear war?
No. So that is a one-word answer to a question about Vladimir Putin putting Russia's nuclear forces on high alert. This is the president gets ready for his first State of the Union address later tonight, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine far from the only crisis on his plate. Peter Doocy, live from the White House, kicks it off this hour with us now. Peter, good morning there.
Good morning, Bill. And before President Biden can talk about Putin's nuclear comments, they've got to figure out what Putin meant.
What's the U.S. doing to reduce the possibility of nuclear war?
Well, I think, one, we are not escalating our own rhetoric. Two, we are certainly assessing what President Putin's comments mean.
A senior administration official is telling us now President Biden plans to talk about the ways he's rallied the world against the Russian invasion. But some who plan to attend tonight hope that he's got a little bit more bite than that.
I think from a commander-in-chief's standpoint, he needs to speak directly to Putin. We have nukes as well. That said, they are never to be used.
We know there's going to be pressure on Congress tonight. The president is going to use the bully pulpit to tell them to send him a bill that lowers prescription drug costs, lowers health care premiums, and lowers utility bills. Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn speculates, quote, I think they've probably torn up the draft they had for the State of the Union and are realizing that issues are getting away from them. But there is one big issue we are told the president will not avoid.
Let me say the president will absolutely use the word inflation tomorrow, and he will talk about inflation in his speech.
And even with everything else going on in the world, we do not expect to see President Biden on camera until he loads up into the limo for the short motorcade ride up to the State of the Union. Back to you.
Thank you, Peter. Peter Ducey at the North Lawn there. See you a bit later. Thank you, sir. Dana.
And here with us now is Josh Holmes, former chief of staff to Senator Mitch McConnell and co-host of the Ruthless podcast, and Juan Williams, Fox News political analyst. Great to have you both. Just a little note from Jen Psaki we just heard from in Peter Ducey's package. Said absolutely there are foreign policy events that happen, and so the speech will reflect that. But also, Josh, there was this in the Washington Post. This is a Biden voter who was interviewed who said, ultimately, I think things are not progressing in any area. It just feels like there has not really been any progress on anything. To me, it's like a ghost year.
Really well said. I mean, look, this is amongst the least popular presidents to address a joint session of Congress, maybe in history, right? But more concerning with him for a speech like this is the method by which he got here, because it's not just circumstantial events that has made Joe Biden and his administration unpopular. Almost everything they've done domestically and internationally has turned into a disaster, right? I mean, we're talking everything from inflation, all of the prescriptions to deal with COVID made things worse, schools, energy policy, immigration, Afghanistan, now Ukraine. You can just roll down this list, and everything is a tough deal.
It's a long list.
I think Juan disagrees.
Yeah. I think I strongly disagree. I mean, to me, the country is grumpy. I think, we've been through a very long pandemic. And we're also struggling, it seems to me, with the kind of economic turmoil that has resulted in inflation, which the president, as Psaki said, will have to address tonight. But the reality is, I think this president right now, in terms of dealing with the current issue of war, has been just ideal in terms of his patience, his willingness to wait out Putin, to use our intelligence facility to say, here is what he's going to do, let people know what's coming, and not overreact. On the nuclear issue, we should not act in a provocative manner that would allow him to justify taking more aggressive steps. We want to have the focus be on Putin and what he's doing, his erratic behavior, his criminal behavior. I think that's the right step. Just in terms of the polls and the fact that Biden's unpopular at this moment, I think, have to factor in the fact that we've been through so much, and I think that's why tonight you'll hear him talk about this is a resilient, strong America where the economy, the GDP is great, unemployment's low, and remind people, hey, believe in yourselves.
I think part of the problem he has in framing that is that this city's stuck in time. This is the first time I've been in Washington in a year. I can't believe that the district is still in the state that it's in. It's almost as if they haven't moved on from the pandemic. And now the mask mandate, I think, was lifted last night at midnight, I do believe. Okay, I mean,
so by the way,
so
nothing to do with the State of the Union.
But if you want to get inside in the hall tonight, you got to take a COVID test. Right. I just think the greater majority of America has moved on from that moment, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was really striking the other day when he was announcing his Supreme Court nomination, and they're like, standing behind him, double masked. The rest of the country has moved through this, right? You've still got a teachers union dictating policy where kids in schools with masks on, CDC hasn't revised that piece of guidance, despite the revision of Statuary Hall the night before the State of the Union, which is a total coincidence, I might add. So, look, you're right. This is stuck in time. They've got a bunch of real problems, and they're getting worse. That's the problem, the biggest problem.
My biggest point is that America's moved on, largely so. Juan.
I think the polls show that Americans think we still need to take steps to make sure that if there's another way, we are protected, and we really want to protect our kids. So I think it's up to local governments, local school boards, to make that choice. Now, the courts have said it. I think the governors, both Democratic and Republican, are saying so. So it's not that I think this city, for example, is stuck in time. I think we are more democratic, if you will, in terms of that cautionary attitude towards the pandemic than much of the country. But I think if you're in Democratic-led cities and states, you're going to see much of this. I think lots of people, by the way, of their own choice, and employers too, still have requirements because they don't think this is over.
But they're starting to drop those. For example, Target Corporation and others, Google included, big corporations saying we're going to back off. But the one group that's not going to forget, that they could have taken these mask mandates off 8 weeks ago and they didn't until the night before the State of the Union are the COVID moms.
Exactly.
And they are going to be out in force in November of 2020. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Nice to see you
Good to see
in
you.
person.
Very nice.
Flesh.
Welcome to the city.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Well, join us for special coverage with Brett and Martha tonight. That's at 8:55 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you there.
Okay. Meanwhile, the U.S. and its allies slapping new sanctions on Russia and its central bank, but critics say those measures still have giant loopholes. One of those critics, Senator Tom Cotton. He's on deck. Next.
We need to pound the Russian oil and gas sector. It's 40% of the income for Putin's war machine. And every barrel of oil we buy from Russia is...
The refugee agency now estimates 660,000 have escaped Russia's war and have left the country entirely. Many others desperately waiting at train stations in the hopes of finding refuge in the European Union.
Scared of war, of Putin. We left everything and just run away.
Well, the Poles have been incredibly accepting of the refugees from Ukraine. Meanwhile, Airbnb saying it's offering free temporary housing for up to 100,000 refugees in Poland, Romania, Germany, and Hungary. That's with the help of Airbnb hosts and donations to its refugee fund. So you can see the effort is widespread, as it should be.
I read an account of a situation at the train station in Kyiv as people were trying to get on, and there was a woman separated from her child for just a few moments, but it was enough to have a scream that this reporter said they could not even actually begin to describe in words, that it was so blood-curdling.
Day 6, too. Only.
All right, we have a market check for you here. The market just opened. It's down about 160 points now as the world wakes up to, as Bill just said, the 6th day. And we have sanctions that are starting to settle into the market and being analyzed. And meantime, there's even more pain at the pump. According to AAA, the national average for a gallon of gas is now $3.62, and that's a 9-cent jump from just last week.
Everybody pays that. Meanwhile, the U.S. and its allies increasing their sanctions against Russia, now targeting the central bank after the invasion. But there is a giant loophole. The measures avoid Russia's oil and natural gas industries, whose bigger customers include the U.S. and much of Europe. So that money keeps flowing into Moscow. Jackie Heinrich asking Jen Psaki about this exception.
In layman's terms, we are not going to be making any policy from the U.S. government that would prohibit the sale or the purchase of Russian gas, then, because it's not something that we already do.
We haven't ruled out that.
So with us now, Republican Senator Tom Cotton out of Arkansas, member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. And, sir, it's good to see you.
Good to see you.
After all this time. Yeah, good morning to you.
Yeah, good to see you in person.
You'll be in the chamber tonight for the State of the Union address, and we'll see what the president has to say. Your assessment of Vladimir Putin and his intentions now are what, as you wake up on this day?
Well, Vladimir Putin for 20 years has wanted to reassemble the Russian Empire. He's had that imperialist ambition since he took office. I think what he's seen over the last 6 months is a perception of weakness and opportunity. He saw our withdrawal from Afghanistan. He began building up these troops on the border of Ukraine just a few weeks later. He also saw a long series of one-sided concessions that President Biden gave to him, and I believe that's why he calculated that he could go for the jugular now in Ukraine, which is what he's always wanted to do. All credit here goes to the brave men and women in Ukraine who are fighting back against his army, not just their armed forces, but the moms and kids making Molotov cocktails, or the grandmas and grandfathers who are going out to get AKs. This is more than Putin bargained for. And every day they've been able to fight off his war machine is another day that they have emboldened Western leaders to impose sanctions, to send weapons to help them in this fight. But we have to do more. What I hope President Biden will do tonight is announce that we'll have no more half measures on sanctions. You know, they say they've sanctioned 80% of the banks in Russia. Unfortunately, Vladimir Putin controls 100% of the banks. So he can move money around and he can use the other non-sanctioned banks. And we still haven't sanctioned their energy sector at all. We have sent tens of millions of dollars to Vladimir Putin's war machine in just the 6 days of this war, buying his oil. Europe has sent even more. We can impose even more punishing sanctions on him if we will also reverse our terrible energy policies at home here. There's time to do more to support these brave Ukrainians as they fight for their own freedom.
So you've been in State of the Union addresses before, and usually this is a time when the President of the United States can tout his accomplishments. And he'll get a standing ovation, sometimes from just one side of the aisle. But in this case, it's very interesting because two of the accomplishments that I think they would like to talk about, one, they talk about the economy in terms of jobs numbers and things like that. But inflation, partly because of the American Rescue Plan, and because of their energy policies, are driving some of the problems that you see in these reflected in these poll numbers from multiple polls this week, having them in the mid-30s on approval.
Yeah, and also very low approval numbers on his performance with Ukraine, whether we've been tough enough on Vladimir Putin. That's why I say it's time to reverse course here. If gas was still at $2.10 a gallon, not at $3.60 a gallon, we would have a lot more freedom of action to stand up to Vladimir Putin. There are more things that we can continue to do, and that's what he should be announcing tonight.
Well, what's the likelihood that you get some sort of reversal on these policies?
I mean, given what we've seen from the administration in the last few days, it doesn't seem likely. I mean, you see them continuing to double down on tenets of the Green New Deal, while they're also taking steps to continue to reduce our nuclear power sources. You know, just last week, they reversed a permit that would extend the life of a nuclear power plant in Florida. That's the exact opposite we should be doing. In addition to opening up federal lands for new leases, as they put a new moratorium on just last week in the middle of this war, we should be building more nuclear power plants here. We should be building them in Europe as well.
These might all be great ideas, but unless you do it, and unless Zelensky waves the white flag, this country before our eyes will be reduced to rubble, just like Grozny and Chechnya in the late 1990s.
Well, I don't think Volodymyr Zelensky is going to wave the white flag, and I know the Ukrainian people will not wave the white flag. That's why it's that we have to start moving at the speed of war to help them. You know, the Biden administration is still not sharing intelligence fast enough with the Ukrainians to help them target Russians.
Why the holdup on that?
I think the Biden administration constantly is worried about provocations and escalation. You know, why didn't we send all these javelins and stingers 4 months ago, Dana, when we first started to see that build up on Ukraine's border? They were worried that it would be provocative, that it might induce Vladimir Putin to invade Ukraine. Well, how does that look right now?
When you consider the European commitment over the past couple of days, more javelins, you know, from the Baltic states and various countries, and RPGs from Germany, et cetera. I mean, you're a military man. How difficult is that to get into the theater of battle once the battle has already started?
A lot of it already is there, but that gets used very rapidly. It's been great to see the European countries step up. I mean, when you have Luxembourg and Belgium supplying weapons to your enemy, you've made a bad miscalculation, and that's what Vladimir Putin has done. However, Russia has thousands of tanks and hundreds of aircraft, so we need to continue that flow. That means we also need to increase our own defense spending here at home, because a lot of the weapons we're using to supply Ukraine are weapons that our army would use or that we might supply Taiwan with to deter China. And unfortunately, again, the Biden administration is not coming forward with enough money to continue to fund our military at higher levels or to fund it at higher levels in the future. I hope we hear more about that tonight. Unfortunately, I'm doubtful we will.
All right, well, we'll look forward to your analysis post-speech. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Sam. In Ukraine now in its sixth day, Russia apparently frustrated with a lack of progress early on, now ramping up attacks on civilians as we say hello and good morning. Brutal day today. We're live in Washington, D.C., and I'm Bill Hemmer. Hello, Dana.
It's good to be with you. I'm Dana Perino. This is America's Newsroom. We have so much to get to. There's been many developments overnight, including this. Russian missiles targeting a government office building overnight, just steps away from what is known as Freedom Square. It is the cultural heart of Ukraine's second-largest city of Kharkiv.
Just brutal images. Sources telling Fox News this was an assassination attempt. The attacks also destroying an opera house and a concert hall. And take a look at this.
Indiscriminate shelling, blanketing neighborhoods. The Russian bombs leveling homes and apartments across the country. This as Ukraine accuses Moscow of detonating a so-called vacuum bomb. That is an illegal weapon that sucks oxygen from the air and vaporizes its victims.
Another troubling escalation. Satellite images here showing a Russian military convoy stretching for 40 miles in length. It's heading north to south toward Kyiv, raising concerns of an all-out assault on the Ukrainian capital.
Earlier this morning, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky gave an emotional video address to European Parliament, his interpreter speaking through tears. Zelensky reiterated his desire for Ukraine to join the EU. He said, "Prove you are with us, and life will win over death." And here's how that body responded. That ovation lasted for 1 minute and 10 seconds. We have Team Fox coverage. General Jack Keane is standing by with analysis. But first, let's go to Trey Yingst. He's reporting live from Kyiv. Trey?
Bill, Dana, good morning. You saw that video there, a massive explosion at a central square in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city. Dozens of victims, according to emergency services. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky giving some details about what took place. He says 2 Russian cruise missiles slammed into this symbolic square in the second largest Ukrainian city. Take a listen to what the emergency services minister in this area had to say about the scene and what it looked like.
People are under the ruins. We've pulled out bodies of at least 6 people and around 20 people are injured. 8 special equipment are working at the site and 80 rescuers of emergency situations. Together with volunteers, they are cleaning the ruins and bringing out the injured and the bodies.
President Zelensky describing this as undisguised terror and a war crime. It comes as the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv today is bracing for possible attacks on this city. The Russian Defense Ministry releasing some information today indicating they plan to hit security service buildings in this city. There are checkpoints all across the city. We were out today. Every block has things in the road, everything from dump trucks to pianos to potted plants, anything the Ukrainians can do to stop this Russian offensive. We saw those satellite images yesterday, a convoy more than 40 miles long of Russian troops, artillery units, tanks, and a variety of other weapons headed to this capital city. People today are still fleeing. We are at the train station watching as husbands said goodbye to their wives and their kids, many of them going west as the men here in the capital prepare to fight. Bill, Dana?
Trey, one question for you. We've been watching these images as the escalation has really ramped up.